The scorching sun beat down on Katherine Cooper as her horse bolted across the open plains of Colorado, her desperate screams lost to the thundering hooves and howling wind. The day had begun like any other in Platteville, Colorado, in the summer of 1878. Katherine, the 22-year-old daughter of the town's general store owner, had been determined to prove to her father that she could manage deliveries to the outlying homesteads on her own. After all, she had been riding since she was a child, and her father's advancing rheumatism made the long journeys increasingly painful for him. "You are too headstrong for your own good, Katherine," Henry Cooper had warned that morning, his weathered face creased with concern as he watched her load supplies onto her chestnut mare, Penny. "I will be perfectly fine, Father," Katherine had assured him, adjusting her riding skirt and straightening her posture in the saddle. "I have been accompanying you on these routes for years. Besides, the Richardsons are expecting their flour and sugar today, and you know how Mrs. Richardson gets when she cannot bake her Sunday pies." Henry had sighed, recognizing the determined set of his daughter's jaw, the same expression his late wife had worn whenever she'd made up her mind about something. "Very well, but be back before sundown, and stay on the main trails." Katherine had nodded, eager to be on her way, her honey-brown hair braided neatly beneath her wide-brimmed hat. She'd felt a surge of independence as she guided Penny through town, nodding politely to Mrs. Winters, sweeping her porch and tipping her hat to Sheriff Mills, who called out a warning about possible thunderstorms later in the day. The first 3 deliveries had gone smoothly. The Richardsons, the Millers, and old Mr. Peterson had all been grateful for their supplies, offering Katherine cool water and friendly conversation before she continued on her route. It was on the way to the Thompson homestead, the last delivery of the day, that everything had gone terribly wrong. Katherine had decided to take a shortcut through Cottonwood Valley, a route her father rarely used due to the somewhat treacherous terrain, but one that would save her nearly an hour's ride. The valley was peaceful, with cottonwood trees providing occasional shade from the relentless sun, and a small creek trickling alongside the trail. She had been humming to herself, thinking about the new fabric that was due to arrive on tomorrow's stagecoach, when a rattlesnake slithered across the path directly in front of Penny. The mare, typically so steady and reliable, reared up in terror, her front hooves pawing at the air. Katherine, caught unaware, barely managed to stay in the saddle. "Easy, girl, easy," she'd soothed, trying to regain control, but the damage was done. Penny's eyes were wide with fear, and before Katherine could tighten her grip on the reins, the horse bolted, charging forward at a breakneck pace. Now, Katherine clung desperately to the saddle horn, her knuckles white, as Penny thundered across the open prairie, leaving the trail far behind. The mare's panic seemed to grow with each passing moment, fueled by the velocity of her own movement and the terrified cries of her rider. "Whoa, Penny. Please, whoa." Katherine's voice was hoarse from shouting, but the horse paid no heed. Katherine had always prided herself on her horsemanship, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. Each time she attempted to pull back on the reins, Penny would toss her head, nearly unseating her, and continue her frantic gallop. The landscape blurred around them, rocks, cacti, and sagebrush flashing by in a dangerous obstacle course. Katherine knew that at this speed, one misstep could be catastrophic. Her heart hammered in her chest, and tears streamed down her face, stinging her eyes and making it even harder to see where they were headed. "Help!" she screamed, though she knew it was futile. They were miles from town, in a sparsely populated stretch of Colorado territory. Who would hear her? Who would see a lone woman on a runaway horse in this vast wilderness? As if in answer to her unspoken question, The distant sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, hoofbeats that were not Penny's. Katherine risked a glance over her shoulder and saw a cloud of dust in the distance, with a dark shape gaining on them rapidly. A rider. Someone was coming. Hope surged within her chest, only to be replaced by a new fear. Who was this person? In these parts, not all strangers were friendly. Bandits and outlaws were known to prey on vulnerable travelers, and right now, Katherine could not imagine being more vulnerable. Still, whoever it was represented her only chance. The alternative was to continue this wild ride until either Penny exhausted herself, or worse, stumbled and fell, potentially killing them both. The rider behind them was closing the distance quickly, and Katherine could now make out the silhouette of a man on a powerful black stallion. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life in the saddle, leaning low over his horse's neck to minimize resistance as they flew across the prairie. "Help me," Katherine cried again, though the wind whipped her words away. Ahead, the terrain was changing. The relatively flat prairie was giving way to more rugged land, with rocky outcroppings and steep drops. If Penny continued her wild run into that treacherous landscape, the chances of disaster would multiply tenfold. Katherine felt a surge of panic as she realized they were heading straight for a steep-sided ravine. "No, no, no," she whispered, pulling desperately on the reins once more, but Penny was beyond reason, driven purely by instinct and fear. The hoofbeats behind them grew louder, and suddenly the stranger was alongside them, his black stallion matching Penny stride for stride. Katherine caught a glimpse of intense blue eyes beneath the brim of a dusty cowboy hat, a strong jawline, and a determined expression. "Hold on," the man shouted, his voice deep and commanding. "I'm going to try to grab your reins," Katherine nodded frantically, too terrified to speak. The man maneuvered his horse even closer, the animals now running flank to flank. With a skilled movement that spoke of years of experience, he leaned across the narrow gap between them, stretching out a gloved hand toward Penny's bridle. His first attempt failed as Penny tossed her head, nearly causing both horses to lose their footing. The ravine was coming up fast, too fast. "We need to slow her down now," the stranger shouted. "When I say so, pull back on your reins as hard as you can." Katherine nodded again, gathering what strength she had left in her trembling arms. "Now," the man commanded, and Katherine yanked back on the reins with all her might. At the same time, the stranger grabbed Penny's bridle, using his considerable strength to help check the mare's headlong flight. Penny fought against the dual restraint, but the combination of Katherine's pull on the reins and the stranger's firm grip on her bridle began to have an effect. The mare's pace faltered, her gallop slowing incrementally to a canter. But they were still moving too fast, and the ravine was mere yards away. In a move that took Katherine completely by surprise, the stranger released Penny's bridle, guided his stallion even closer, and wrapped a strong arm around Katherine's waist. "Let go of the reins," he ordered. "Trust me." In that split second, Katherine made a decision that would change her life forever. She released the reins and allowed herself to be pulled from Penny's back onto the stranger's horse. The transition was jarring and awkward, but the man's grip was firm, ensuring she didn't fall. As soon as she was secure in front of him, the stranger pulled his stallion to a halt, turning sharply away from the ravine's edge. Katherine watched in horror as Penny, relieved of her rider's weight, slowed her pace just enough to avoid plunging over the edge. The mare circled nervously, still agitated but no longer in a blind panic. Safe in the stranger's arms, Katherine felt the full impact of what had just happened. Her body began to shake uncontrollably, delayed shock setting in as adrenaline ebbed away. Tears flowed freely down her dust-streaked face, and she struggled to catch her breath. "You're safe now, miss," the man said, his voice gentler than before. "Just breathe." Katherine nodded, trying to follow his instruction, but her lungs seemed incapable of drawing in enough air. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, and the last thing she remembered was the stranger's strong arms tightening around her as she slumped against his chest. When Katherine regained consciousness, she was lying on a blanket beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. The sun had moved in the sky, suggesting that some time had passed. She blinked, disoriented, and tried to sit up. "Easy now," came the same deep voice from earlier. "You've had quite an ordeal." Katherine turned toward the sound and saw her rescuer kneeling beside a small campfire a few feet away. With his hat removed, she could see that he had thick, wavy dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His face was tanned and weathered from life outdoors, but he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His most striking feature was those intense blue eyes that had caught her attention during her wild ride. Where am I?" Katherine asked, her throat dry and raspy. The man reached for a canteen and brought it to her. "About 5 miles east of Platteville." "You fainted, so I thought it best to stop and let you recover before trying to get you home." Katherine accepted the canteen gratefully and took a small sip of water. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were wholly inadequate for what this man had done. "You saved my life." He shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Penny," Katherine suddenly exclaimed, looking around anxiously. "My horse, she's fine," the man assured her, gesturing to where both horses were tethered nearby. Penny was grazing calmly, showing no signs of her earlier distress. "A little spooked, but no worse for wear. I managed to catch her after you fainted." Relief flooded through Katherine. Her father would have been devastated if anything had happened to Penny, not to mention the financial hardship of losing a good horse. "I'm Katherine Cooper," she said, remembering her manners. "My father owns Cooper's General Store in Platteville." "Levy Jansen," the man replied with a nod. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Cooper, though I wish it had been under better circumstances." "As do I, Mr. Jansen," Katherine agreed, a faint blush coloring her cheeks as she realized how disheveled she must look. Her riding skirt was dirty and torn in places, her blouse was wrinkled and damp with sweat, and her hair had come loose from its braid, falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. "I must look a fright." Levy's gaze was direct but respectful. "You look like someone who survived a dangerous situation, Miss Cooper. There's no shame in that." There was something about his straightforward manner that Katherine found refreshing. Most of the young men in town were either intimidated by her independent spirit or overly eager to impress her due to her father's position in the community. Levy Jansen seemed unbothered by either concern. "Are you from around here, Mr. Jansen?" she asked, brushing dust from her skirt in a futile attempt to make herself more presentable. "I don't believe I've seen you in Platteville before." "I've been working at the Lazy S Ranch for about 6 months now," he explained, stirring the small fire with a stick. "Before that, I was up in Wyoming Territory, and before that, Montana. I tend to move where the work takes me." "A true cowboy, then," Katherine observed. Levy chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "I suppose that's as good a description as any." "Well, this true cowboy has my eternal gratitude," Katherine said sincerely. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." Levy's expression grew more serious. "What were you doing out here alone, if you don't mind my asking?" "These trails can be dangerous, especially for a solitary rider." Katherine stiffened slightly at the question, which felt too close to her father's frequent concerns about her independence. "I was making deliveries for my father's store," she replied, her chin lifting slightly. "I am quite capable of handling myself under normal circumstances." "I don't doubt that," Levy said, surprising her. "But even the most experienced rider can find themselves in trouble if a horse gets spooked. I've seen cowboys with 30 years in the saddle get thrown when a snake crossed their path." Katherine relaxed, appreciating that he wasn't questioning her abilities, but merely stating a fact of life on the frontier. "It was a rattlesnake," she admitted. "It startled Penny, and before I knew it, we were racing across the prairie." Levy nodded. "Rattlers have that effect on horses. You did well to stay in the saddle as long as you did. Many riders would have been thrown in the first few seconds." The compliment, delivered matter-of-factly rather than as flattery, warmed Katherine. "Thank you, though I'm not sure my horsemanship would have saved me from that ravine." "Which is why I happen to be riding this way," Levy said, standing up and adding a few more twigs to the fire. "Do you feel up to eating something? I have some jerky and hardtack in my saddlebag. Not exactly a feast, but it'll keep your strength up for the ride back to town." Katherine suddenly realized she was famished. The terror of her wild ride had temporarily suppressed her hunger, but now her stomach growled audibly, causing her to blush again. "That would be very kind, thank you." As Levy retrieved the food from his saddlebag, Katherine took the opportunity to tidy herself as best she could, retying her hair into a loose braid and brushing off the worst of the dirt from her clothing. She was keenly aware of how improper their situation was, an unmarried woman alone with a strange man, miles from town. But circumstances had made propriety a luxury she couldn't afford at the moment. Levy returned with the promised jerky and hardtack, along with a small cloth bundle that turned out to contain a few dried apples. He offered them to Katherine first, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. "So what brought you out this way today?" Katherine asked eventually, curious about her rescuer. "It seems fortuitous that you were close enough to help me." Levy took a sip from his canteen before answering. "I was checking on some strays from the Lazy S. We've had a few head wander off in this direction over the past week. Found 3 of them about an hour before I heard your horse thundering across the prairie." "And instead of continuing your search, you came to help a stranger," Katherine noted. "Your employer must be understanding." A shadow passed over Levy's features briefly. "Old man Sullivan expects results, not excuses. But he'd be the first to say that helping someone in trouble takes precedence over a few stray cattle." Katherine sensed there was more to the story of Levy's relationship with his employer, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "How long have you been a cowboy, Mr. Jansen?" "Since I was 16, Levy replied, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Left home in Missouri after my parents died of typhoid. Had an uncle who worked a ranch in Kansas, so I headed there and learned the trade." "I'm sorry about your parents," Katherine said softly. Levy nodded his acknowledgement of her sympathy. "It was a long time ago. What about you? Have you lived in Platteville all your life?" "Since I was 7, Katherine answered. "My father moved us here from Boston after my mother died. He said the western air would be good for us, but I think he just needed a fresh start somewhere far from the memories." "And was it? Good for you, I mean?" Katherine considered the question thoughtfully. "Yes, I believe it was. I miss the theaters and libraries of Boston sometimes, but I've grown to love the openness of Colorado. There's a freedom here that doesn't exist back east." Levy smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face and made those blue eyes crinkle at the corners. "That's exactly what keeps me out here too. The freedom." For a moment, they looked at each other with mutual understanding, 2 souls who appreciated the wild beauty and liberty of frontier life despite its hardships. Katherine felt a strange flutter in her chest, one that had nothing to do with her earlier fright and everything to do with the man sitting across from her. Becoming aware of the lengthening shadows, Levy glanced at the position of the sun. "We should probably start back to town if you're feeling strong enough to ride. I wouldn't want your father to worry any more than necessary." Katherine nodded, reluctantly acknowledging the wisdom of his words. "Yes, he'll be frantic by now. I was supposed to be back before sundown." Levy stood and offered her his hand. Katherine took it, feeling the strength and calluses that spoke of years of hard work. He helped her to her feet with ease, and for a moment, they stood close enough that Katherine could detect the scent of leather, horses, and something uniquely his own, a clean, masculine smell that was oddly comforting. Aware of their proximity, Katherine stepped back, smoothing her skirt nervously. "I should check on Penny before we leave." "Of course," Levy agreed, releasing her hand and turning to extinguish the small campfire. Katherine walked over to where Penny was tethered, speaking softly to the mare as she approached. The horse nickered in recognition, seeming completely recovered from her earlier panic. Katherine ran her hands along Penny's neck and flanks, checking for any injuries, but the horse appeared unharmed. "She seems fine," Levy confirmed, coming to stand beside her. "Strong animal you've got there." "My father bought her for me on my 16th birthday," Katherine explained, stroking Penny's velvety muzzle. "We've been through a lot together, but nothing like today's adventure." Levy checked the cinch on Penny's saddle, making sure it was secure. "Do you think you'll be comfortable riding her back, or would you prefer to ride with me? My Diablo here can easily carry us both." Katherine hesitated, torn between her desire to prove she could manage and the lingering fear from her harrowing experience. I think I should ride Penny," she decided. "If I don't get back on her now, it might be harder later." Levy nodded approvingly. "Wise decision, but I'll lead her for the first mile or so, just until you're both settled." "Thank you," Katherine said, relieved by the compromise that allowed her to maintain her independence without being foolhardy. Levy helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. Once she was settled, he handed her the reins but kept hold of Penny's bridle with a lead rope, ensuring he maintained control if the mare spooked again. They set off toward Platteville at a gentle walk, the evening air cooling around them as the sun dipped toward the western mountains. Katherine found herself studying Levy's back as he led her horse, noting the broad shoulders beneath his faded blue shirt and the confident way he sat in the saddle. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steady reliability that made her feel safe despite the day's events. After about a mile, as promised, Levy handed her the lead rope. "She seems calm enough now, but we'll keep the pace easy and I'll stay right beside you." True to his word, Levy kept Diablo matched stride for stride with Penny as they continued toward town. The two horses seemed to develop a quick rapport, the stallion's calm presence having a visibly soothing effect on the mare. As they rode, Katherine found herself sharing more about her life in Platteville, her work at the store, her passion for books, her small garden behind their modest house. Levy, in turn, told her stories of his years on the trail, of cattle drives and boomtowns, of mountain blizzards and desert heat. "Doesn't it get lonely?" Katherine asked after Levy described spending 3 months on a remote line shack in Montana. Moving from place to place, never setting down roots. Levy was quiet for a moment before responding. "I reckon it does sometimes, but there's always new people to meet, new horizons to see, and I've never been one for staying in one place too long. No sweetheart waiting for you somewhere." The question slipped out before Katherine could consider its propriety, and she immediately blushed. "I'm sorry, that's far too personal." Rather than taking offense, Levy chuckled. No need to apologize, and no, there's no sweetheart. Never found a woman who'd be content with a wandering cowboy for a husband. The implication that he had considered marriage at some point intrigued Katherine, but she didn't pursue it. Instead, she changed the subject. Tell me about the Lazy S. Is it a large operation? Levy seemed relieved by the shift to safer territory. About 2,000 head of cattle, which makes it middling for these parts. Sullivan's been running it for nearly 20 years. He's a fair boss, if a bit set in his ways. His daughter Clara handles the books and most of the business side of things. Clara Sullivan. Katherine perked up at the familiar name. I know her. She comes into the store every Thursday for supplies and always orders the latest catalogs from back east. That sounds like Clara, Levy agreed with a smile. She's determined to bring some civilization to the ranch, much to her father's dismay. She had a piano shipped all the way from Chicago last year, cost a small fortune, and took 6 men to get it into the house. Katherine laughed, picturing the scene. I'd love to hear it sometime. I haven't played since we left Boston. You should come out to the ranch, Levy suggested. Clara would enjoy the company of another young woman. There aren't many out our way. Perhaps I will, Katherine replied, intrigued by the invitation and the possibility of seeing Levy again in a more proper setting. As they crested a hill, the lights of Platteville came into view in the valley below. The sun had set completely now, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Katherine felt a pang of regret that their journey was nearing its end. Looks like we made it back just in time, Levy observed. Any later and they might have organized a search party. Katherine winced at the thought of causing such trouble. My father is going to be beside himself with worry. I'll explain what happened, Levy assured her. It wasn't your fault that Penny got spooked. They rode down into town, the buildings growing larger as they approached. Even at this hour, Platteville's main street showed signs of life. The saloon was lit up and busy, and several other businesses still had lamps burning in their windows. As they passed the sheriff's office, the door opened, and Sheriff Mills stepped out, his eyes widening when he caught sight of them. Miss Cooper, he called, striding toward them. Your father's been worried sick. He was just in here asking me to organize a search at first light. I'm fine, Sheriff, Katherine assured him, reining Penny to a stop. Thanks to Mr. Jansen here. My horse was spooked by a rattlesnake and bolted. Mr. Jansen caught up to us and saved me from a very nasty fall. The sheriff looked Levy over with newfound respect. Is that so? Well, Mr. Jansen, it seems we owe you a debt of gratitude. Levy touched the brim of his hat modestly. Just did what anyone would do, Sheriff. Well, let's get you to your pa, Sheriff Mills said to Katherine. He's probably back at your place by now. I told him to go home and wait in case you showed up. I'll see Miss Cooper safely home, Levy said, his tone making it clear he intended to complete what he'd started. The sheriff nodded, seeming to understand. Very good. I'll stop by the store tomorrow to make sure everything's all right. With a nod to them both, Sheriff Mills returned to his office, and Levy and Katherine continued down the main street toward the Cooper residence, which sat behind the general store on the eastern edge of town. As they approached, Katherine could see a lamp burning in the front window of the small house, and the moment their horses' hooves sounded on the packed dirt of the yard, the front door flew open. Henry Cooper rushed out, his lined face a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Katherine, he cried, hurrying toward them as quickly as his rheumatic legs would allow. Thank God, Katherine dismounted with Levy's assistance and ran to embrace her father. I'm all right, Father. I'm so sorry to have worried you. Henry held her tightly for a moment before pulling back to examine her face in the lamplight from the open door. What happened? You're filthy and your dress is torn. Penny was spooked by a rattlesnake on the trail back from the Thompson place, Katherine explained. She bolted, and I couldn't control her, if Mr. Jansen hadn't come along when he did. She trailed off, not wanting to distress her father further by describing how close she'd come to disaster. Henry turned his attention to Levy, who had dismounted and was standing respectfully a few feet away, holding both horses' reins. "You saved my daughter, sir," Levy nodded. "I was fortunate to be nearby when it happened, Mr. Cooper." "Your daughter handled herself admirably under the circumstances. Please, come inside," Henry insisted, gesturing toward the house. "It's the least I can do to offer you some hospitality after what you've done for us." "I should see to the horses first," Levy demurred. Of course," Henry agreed. "The stable is just around back. Katherine can show you." Katherine led Levy around to the small stable behind the house, where they unsaddled and brushed down both horses, working side by side in companionable silence. There was something intimate about the domestic task, something that made Katherine acutely aware of Levy's presence beside her. "Thank you again," she said softly as they finished. "Not just for saving me, but for bringing me home and explaining everything to my father. It would have been much harder to face him alone." Levy looked down at her, his expression serious in the lantern light. "You don't strike me as someone who hides from difficult conversations, Miss Cooper." "Katherine," she corrected him. "After what we've been through today, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." A slow smile spread across his face. "Katherine, then, and I'm Levy." For a moment they stood looking at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Levy cleared his throat and gestured toward the house. "We shouldn't keep your father waiting." Inside, Henry had prepared a simple but hearty meal of leftover stew, fresh bread, and coffee. As they ate, Levy provided a more detailed account of the afternoon's events, tactfully emphasizing Katherine's courage while downplaying the danger. "It seems we are forever in your debt, Mr. Jansen," Henry said when the tale was complete. "If there's ever anything I can do for you, you need only ask." "No debt necessary, sir," Levy replied. "Though I wouldn't say no to a good meal and pleasant company whenever I'm in town," Henry chuckled. "Consider our table always open to you." As the evening wore on, Katherine found herself reluctant to see Levy leave. There was something about his quiet confidence and straightforward manner that appealed to her deeply. When he finally rose to depart, citing an early start at the ranch the next day, she felt a distinct sense of loss. "I'll walk you out," she offered, ignoring her father's raised eyebrow on the front porch away from Henry's watchful gaze. Katherine turned to Levy. "Will you really come back to visit? Or was that just a polite thing to say?" In the soft glow from the window, Levy's blue eyes seemed even more intense. "I don't say things I don't mean, Katherine. I'd very much like to see you again. The store is closed on Sundays," she said, "but I'm often reading on the porch in the afternoons if you happen to be riding by." Levy smiled, understanding her hint. "I might find myself in town this Sunday, now that you mention it." Before she could respond, he took her hand gently and brought it to his lips in a gesture that belonged more to a drawing room than a frontier porch. "Until then, Katherine Cooper." With that, he was gone, mounting Diablo with fluid grace and riding off into the night, leaving Katherine standing on the porch with her heart beating faster than it had during the entire wild ride earlier that day. True to his word, Levy appeared in town that Sunday afternoon, looking decidedly different from the dust-covered cowboy who had rescued Katherine days earlier. He trimmed his hair, shaved carefully, and donned a clean shirt beneath a well-worn but brushed vest. His boots had been polished, and he carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. Katherine, who had indeed been reading on the porch as promised, felt her heart leap at the sight of him approaching on foot, having left his horse at the livery stable at the edge of town. "Good afternoon, Miss Cooper," he called, his formality clearly for the benefit of any neighbors who might be watching. "Mr. Jansen," she returned with equal propriety, though her smile betrayed her pleasure at seeing him. "What a pleasant surprise." Levy climbed the steps and held out the package. "I brought you something. A thank you for the meal the other night." Curious, Katherine unwrapped the parcel to find a small, leather-bound volume of poetry. "Elizabeth Barrett Browning," she read, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "How lovely. The general store in Fort Collins had it," Levy explained. "You mentioned your love of books, and I thought—" "It's perfect," Katherine assured him, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. "Won't you sit? I've just made lemonade." They spent the afternoon on the porch, talking and laughing as if they'd known each other for years instead of days. Katherine discovered that beneath Levy's quiet exterior lay a quick wit and a curious mind. He'd educated himself through years of reading whenever he could get his hands on books, and his observations about the world were both insightful and occasionally surprising. "Most people look at me and see just another saddle tramp," Levy admitted at one point. "They don't expect me to have read Shakespeare or know who Benjamin Franklin was. Most people are too quick to judge by appearances," Katherine replied. "I've lived here for 15 years, and some folks still treat me like an outsider because I'm from the East and like to read fancy books, as Sheriff Mills calls them." Levy chuckled. "Seems we're both misfits in our own way." "Perhaps that's why we get along so well," Katherine suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. Levy's gaze met hers, warm and appreciative. "Perhaps it is." That Sunday afternoon marked the beginning of a courtship that soon had the whole town talking. Levy rode into Platteville whenever he could get away from his duties at the Lazy S, sometimes just for an hour to share a meal or a conversation, other times for a full day that they spent riding through the countryside or picnicking by the river that ran east of town. Henry Cooper, after initial reservations about the cowboy courting his daughter, gradually warmed to Levy as he came to know him better. He recognized in the young man a solid character and genuine affection for Katherine, which was all a father could really ask for. One hot August afternoon, about 2 months after the day Penny had bolted, Levy invited Katherine to ride out to the Lazy S with him. "Clara's been asking when I'm going to bring you by," he explained, "and I'd like you to see where I work." Katherine eagerly accepted, curious to see the ranch that featured so prominently in Levy's stories. They set out early to avoid the worst of the day's heat, riding side by side through rolling hills covered in summer-dried grass. "It's strange to think that if Penny hadn't bolted that day, we might never have met," Katherine mused as they rode. Levy glanced over at her, his expression thoughtful. "I'd like to think our paths would have crossed eventually. Platteville isn't that big, after all." "But would you have noticed me?" Katherine challenged. "Just the shopkeeper's bookish daughter, Katherine," Levy said, reining Diablo to a stop and waiting for her to do the same with Penny. "I would have noticed you anywhere. You're not the kind of woman a man overlooks." The sincerity in his voice made her blush. Before she could formulate a response, Levy pointed ahead to where the land dipped into a verdant valley. "There it is, the Lazy S." Katherine followed his gesture and saw a sprawling ranch spread out below them. A large main house and several outbuildings formed the core, surrounded by corrals, barns, and bunkhouses. Beyond, cattle grazed in fenced pastures that stretched toward the horizon. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "I can see why you speak of it with such affection." Levy nodded, a certain pride evident in his posture. "Sullivan built it all from nothing. Started with 50 head of cattle and a run-down cabin 20 years ago. Now it's one of the most successful ranches in the county. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the main compound, a woman emerged from the house onto the wide front porch. Even from a distance, Katherine recognized Clara Sullivan's distinctive red hair and confident bearing. "Levy Jansen," Clara called, waving enthusiastically. "It's about time you brought Miss Cooper to visit us." Clara, a forthright woman of 26 with freckled skin and intelligent green eyes, welcomed Katherine warmly. "I've been dying to meet the woman who's made our Levy ride into town at every opportunity," she said with a teasing glance at the cowboy. Katherine liked her immediately. "And I've been curious about the famous Clara Sullivan and her piano shipped all the way from Chicago." Clara laughed, linking her arm through Katherine's and leading her toward the house. "Oh, we're going to get along splendidly. Come in, come in. Father's out with the men moving cattle to the north pasture, but he should be back for supper. You will stay, won't you?" Before Katherine could respond, Levy answered for them both. "We'd be delighted." The main house was impressive by frontier standards, a solid 2-story structure built of locally quarried stone and well-seasoned timber. Inside, Clara had created a home that balanced frontier practicality with Eastern refinement. The furniture was sturdy but well-crafted, and feminine touches were evident in the curtains, cushions, and framed artwork on the walls. And there, dominating the parlor, stood the famous piano, a gleaming rosewood instrument that looked as if it belonged in a Boston drawing room rather than a Colorado ranch house. "It's magnificent," Katherine breathed, running her fingers lightly over the polished wood. "You play?" Clara asked eagerly. "I did once," Katherine admitted, "but it's been years since I've had the opportunity." "Then you must play for us now," Clara insisted, opening the keyboard cover and revealing pristine ivory keys. "I love music but have no talent for it myself. This beautiful instrument deserves someone who can do it justice." Despite her protests about being out of practice, Katherine found herself seated at the piano, her fingers hesitantly finding their way across the keys. After a few stumbling attempts, muscle memory took over, and she began to play a Chopin nocturne that had been her mother's favorite. As the music filled the room, Katherine lost herself in the familiar melodies, memories of her childhood in Boston flowing through her along with the notes. When she finally finished and looked up, she was startled to see not only Clara and Levy watching her with appreciation, but also an older man standing in the doorway, tall and weathered, with a shock of white hair and the same green eyes as Clara. "That was mighty fine playing, young lady," the man said, his voice gruff but kind. "Reminds me of my late wife. She loved music too." Clara moved to the man's side. "Father, this is Katherine Cooper from Platteville. Katherine, my father, Samuel Sullivan." Katherine rose and curtsied slightly, feeling suddenly shy under the rancher's appraising gaze. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you for welcoming me to your beautiful home." "Any friend of Levy's is welcome here," Sullivan replied, giving the cowboy a meaningful look that made Katherine wonder exactly what Levy had told his employer about their relationship. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with Clara showing Katherine around the house and grounds while Levy helped Sullivan with some ranch business. By the time they gathered for supper, Katherine felt as if she'd known the Sullivans for years rather than hours. Over a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from Clara's garden, Sullivan regaled them with stories of the early days of the ranch, when hostile Indians and ruthless cattle rustlers had been constant threats. Those were hard times, the old rancher reflected. But in some ways simpler. A man knew where he stood and what he was fighting for. "Father thinks everything was better in the old days," Clara said with affectionate exasperation. "He still complains about the railroad coming through, even though it's made selling our cattle 10 times easier." Sullivan harumphed. "Progress isn't always for the better, girl. Look at what's happening up in the mining towns, men packed in like sardines, fighting and killing each other over claims, the land torn up and poisoned." "But there are good changes too," Katherine ventured. "Schools being built, law and order established, more opportunities for everyone." Sullivan studied her with newfound interest. "You're an educated young woman, aren't you, Miss Cooper? Where did you learn to think like that?" "My mother was a teacher before she married," Katherine explained. "She made sure I received a proper education, even after we moved west, and my father has always encouraged my reading." "A rare man, your father," Sullivan observed. "Most men out here don't see the point in educating daughters beyond cooking and sewing." "Henry Cooper is indeed a rare man," Levy agreed, his gaze warm as it rested on Katherine. "And he raised a remarkable daughter." The conversation continued through dessert, Clara's excellent apple pie, and into the evening as they gathered in the parlor. At Katherine's request, Clara showed her father's collection of books, which was impressively extensive for a frontier ranch. "Father reads everything he can get his hands on," Clara explained. "Says a man who stops learning might as well stop breathing." "A philosophy I share," Katherine said, earning an approving nod from Sullivan. As the evening wore on, Katherine became increasingly aware of the lateness of the hour and the impropriety of returning to town after dark, even with Levy as escort. Sensing her concern, Clara suggested, "You must stay the night, Katherine. We have plenty of room, and I so rarely have female company. Levy can take the spare room in the bunkhouse." Katherine hesitated, thinking of her father. "I didn't tell my father I might be staying overnight." "I'll send one of the boys to Platteville with a message," Sullivan offered. "He can be there and back in a few hours." With that practical solution, Katherine gratefully accepted the invitation. While Sullivan dispatched a ranch hand to inform Henry of the change in plans, Clara showed Katherine to a comfortable guest room on the second floor. "I've put you in the room next to mine," Clara said, lighting a lamp on the bedside table. "I've left a nightgown and some toiletries for you. We're close enough in size that it should fit well enough." "Thank you," Katherine said, genuinely touched by the other woman's thoughtfulness. "You've been so kind to a virtual stranger." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her expression turning serious. "Can I speak frankly with you, Katherine?" Slightly taken aback by the sudden change in tone, Katherine nodded. "Levy Jansen is like a brother to me," Clara began. "He came to work for us during one of the worst winters we'd ever seen. 3 men had already quit, unable to handle the conditions, but Levy stayed, working from dawn until well past dusk, never complaining, never asking for special treatment. He saved half our herd that winter, and my father has respected him ever since." Katherine listened, curious about where this was leading. "In the 3 years he's worked for us, I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you," Clara continued. "Levy's always been reserved, keeps to himself mostly, doesn't join the other hands when they go carousing in town. Some of the local girls have set their caps for him, but he's never shown interest, until you." Katherine felt a blush spreading across her cheeks. I'm very fond of him as well." Clara smiled, seemingly satisfied with this response. "I thought as much. I just wanted you to know that if you care for him in return, you'll find no opposition from me or my father. Quite the contrary, in fact. Father has always said Levy has the makings of a fine rancher himself someday, if he could just find a reason to put down roots." With that pointed observation hanging in the air, Clara bid Katherine good night, leaving her alone with thoughts that kept her awake long into the night. The next morning, After a breakfast that confirmed Clara's skills extended well beyond the piano to the kitchen, Levy suggested showing Katherine the rest of the ranch before they returned to town. "There's a particularly beautiful spot by the creek that I'd like you to see," he said, with a glance at Sullivan that made Katherine suspect some prior arrangement between the men. Sullivan nodded his approval. "Take your time. No pressing business today that can't wait." They rode out across the ranch lands, Levy pointing out features of interest: the best grazing areas, the line shacks used during winter, the natural springs that made the Lazy S more valuable than many neighboring properties. Throughout it all, Katherine was struck by Levy's deep knowledge of and connection to the land. "You really love it here, don't you?" she observed as they rode side by side. Levy looked around at the rolling grasslands, the distant mountains, the vast blue sky overhead. "I love the land," he confirmed. "Always have wherever I've been. But yes, there's something special about this place." Eventually, they reached a small creek lined with cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling gently in the summer breeze. Levy dismounted and helped Katherine down, tethering both horses to a nearby tree. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," he told her, leading her to where the creek widened into a small, clear pool. "I come here to think sometimes, when decisions need making or problems need solving." Katherine looked around appreciatively. "I can see why. It's peaceful here." Levy seemed unusually tense, pacing a few steps away and then back again before speaking. "Katherine, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned before now." Alarmed by his serious tone, Katherine braced herself. "What is it?" Levy took a deep breath. "Sullivan has offered me a partnership in the ranch." Of all the things Katherine had feared he might say that he was leaving, that he had a wife somewhere, that their courtship had been a mistake, this was so unexpected that she simply stared at him. "A partnership," she repeated. "But that's wonderful, isn't it?" "It could be," Levy agreed cautiously. "Sullivan's getting older. His son was killed in the war, and Clara has no interest in running cattle, though she loves the ranch itself. He needs someone to help manage things now and eventually take over." "And he chose you," Katherine said, pride evident in her voice. "That speaks volumes about how much he values you, Levy." "Yes, but accepting would mean committing to staying here permanently. No more wandering, no more moving on when the mood strikes." Levy's blue eyes searched her face intently. "It would mean putting down roots, Katherine," understanding dawned slowly. "And that's always been difficult for you." Levy nodded, moving closer to take her hands in his. "Until now. Until you." Katherine's breath caught in her throat as Levy continued, his voice deep with emotion. "Meeting you has changed everything for me, Katherine. For the first time since I left home all those years ago, I've found someone that matters more to me than the freedom of the open road." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small object that glinted in the sunlight, a simple gold band with a tiny diamond set into it. "This was my mother's," he explained, holding it between them. "The only thing of value I kept when I left Missouri. I've carried it with me all these years, though I never thought I'd have cause to use it." Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes as Levy sank to one knee before her, still holding her left hand. "Katherine Cooper, I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment I pulled you from that runaway horse. You're brave and kind and smarter than anyone I've ever known. Would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Katherine couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Everything was happening so quickly. They'd known each other barely 2 months, and yet it felt right in a way that defied rational explanation. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly. "Yes, Levy, I will marry you." Levy's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but neither of them cared as he rose and took her in his arms, sealing their engagement with a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and giddy with happiness, Levy pressed his forehead against hers. "I should warn you, Mrs. Sullivan expects us to live in the main house, at least until we can build our own place. She's already talking about turning the east wing into a separate apartment for us." Katherine laughed, delighted by the evidence of Clara's confidence in their future. "That sounds perfect to start with, but eventually I'd like our own home, nothing grand, just somewhere that's ours." "I'll build it with my own hands if necessary," Levy promised, "and fill it with as many books as you desire, and children." Katherine asked softly, allowing herself to imagine their future together. Levy's eyes darkened with emotion. "As many as God sees fit to bless us with." They returned to the ranch house hand in hand, their happiness evident to Clara and Sullivan, who were waiting on the porch as if they'd known exactly what was happening by the creek. "Well," Clara demanded the moment they were within earshot. In answer, Katherine held up her left hand, the ring catching the sunlight. Clara squealed with delight and rushed forward to embrace her, while Sullivan clapped Levy firmly on the shoulder, his gruff exterior momentarily softened by genuine pleasure. "Couldn't have chosen better myself, son," the rancher said. "Not for you, and not for the Lazy S." The journey back to Platteville that afternoon had a dreamlike quality for Katherine. The familiar landscape seemed transformed, more vivid and full of promise, as if her new engagement had changed not just her future but her perception of the world itself. Beside her, Levy rode tall and proud, occasionally glancing her way with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. They had agreed to speak to her father immediately, not wanting to delay sharing their news or seeking his blessing. Henry Cooper was in the store when they arrived, restocking shelves with newly arrived goods. His face lit up at the sight of his daughter, but his expression quickly turned to one of knowing resignation when he saw her glowing countenance and the way Levy stood protectively close beside her. "I see," he said simply, setting down a tin of coffee. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation at home." In the privacy of their small parlor, Katherine and Levy formally announced their engagement and intentions. Henry listened quietly, his weathered hands resting on his knees as he sat in his favorite armchair. "This is rather sudden," he observed when they had finished. "You've known each other, what, 2 months?" 10 weeks, sir," Levy confirmed. "But I know my own mind and heart. I love your daughter and will spend my life ensuring her happiness." Henry's gaze shifted to Katherine. "And you, daughter? Are you certain this is what you want? Marriage is not a decision to be made lightly, especially to a man whose life has been spent wandering." "I've never been more certain of anything, father," Katherine replied earnestly. "And Levy has accepted a partnership at the Lazy S. We'll be making our home there." This news clearly surprised Henry. "A partnership with old Sullivan? That's no small thing." "No, sir, it isn't," Levy agreed. "Mr. Sullivan has been generous beyond my expectations. The arrangement includes an ownership stake in the ranch that will increase over time, eventually making me a full partner." Henry's expression softened slightly. "That's a solid future you're offering my daughter, better than many could provide." "It's not just financial security I'm promising, Mr. Cooper," Levy said firmly. "It's a life filled with love and respect. Katherine will be my partner in every sense of the word." Henry studied the young man for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I believe you mean that, Jansen." "Very well, you have my blessing." Katherine crossed the room to embrace her father, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you, father. I promise you won't regret it." "See that I don't," Henry replied gruffly, but his eyes were suspiciously moist as he returned her embrace. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Platteville, eliciting a range of reactions from delighted congratulations to thinly veiled disappointment from several young women who had harbored hopes regarding the handsome cowboy. Katherine found herself the center of attention whenever she ventured into town, with well-meaning but often intrusive questions about wedding plans and her future life at the Lazy S. Clara Sullivan proved an invaluable ally during this time, riding into Platteville frequently to help with preparations and shield Katherine from the worst of the gossip and speculation. The two women grew closer with each passing day, their friendship deepening into a sisterly bond that both treasured. "I've never had a sister," Clara confessed one afternoon as they pored over fabric samples for Katherine's wedding dress. "But I imagine it would feel much like this." Katherine squeezed her future sister-in-law's hand affectionately. "I've always wanted a sister too, and now I'll have one." With Clara's help and Sullivan's generous insistence on covering many of the expenses as a wedding gift, plans for the ceremony took shape rapidly. They decided on an October wedding when the autumn colors would be at their peak and the oppressive heat of summer would have passed. Not too elaborate, Katherine had insisted, just family and close friends. In the end, family and close friends expanded to include most of Platteville and half the neighboring ranches, as Sullivan refused to hear of anything less than a proper celebration for his future partner and his bride. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Levy divided his time between ranch duties and helping Henry at the store, wanting to ease the older man's workload as much as possible before Katherine moved to the Lazy S. Katherine, meanwhile, found herself torn between excitement for her new life and a certain wistfulness about leaving the home and town where she had grown up. "It's not as if you're moving to New York City," Clara reassured her during one such moment of melancholy. "The Lazy S is just a few hours' ride from Platteville. You can visit whenever you wish." "I know," Katherine acknowledged, "and I'm truly happy about our future. It's just—" "Change is always a little frightening," Clara supplied understandingly, "even good change." The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the aspens around Platteville a brilliant gold against the azure Colorado sky. Katherine stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun rise over the eastern plains, feeling a profound sense of standing on the threshold between her old life and the new one awaiting her. Clara arrived early to help her dress, bringing with her not only Katherine's completed wedding gown, but also a special gift, a delicate pearl necklace that had belonged to Clara's mother. "Something borrowed," Clara explained as she fastened it around Katherine's neck. "Mother would have wanted you to wear it today." The ceremony itself was held in Platteville's small church, which had been transformed with autumn flowers and ribbon for the occasion. Levy waited at the altar, looking more handsome than Katherine had ever seen him in a new suit ordered from Denver, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven and solemn with the weight of the moment. As Henry walked her down the aisle, Katherine felt a momentary flutter of nerves, quickly replaced by absolute certainty as her eyes met Levy's. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. The minister's words washed over her solemn promises of love, honor, and faithfulness until death, and when it came time to speak her vows, Katherine's voice was clear and unwavering. Levy's hands were warm and steady as he placed a simple gold band beside his mother's ring on her finger, and his "I do" resonated with conviction that touched everyone present. The celebration afterward was everything Sullivan had promised, tables groaning with food, music from a band brought in from Denver, dancing that continued well into the evening. Katherine found herself passed from partner to partner, as seemingly every man present claimed the right to dance with the bride. But her eyes constantly sought out Levy, who watched her with undisguised adoration. Eventually, the newlyweds slipped away to begin the journey to the Lazy S, where they would spend their first night as husband and wife, before departing the next day for a brief honeymoon in Denver. As their carriage rolled away from Platteville, Katherine leaned against Levy's shoulder, exhaustion and happiness washing over her in equal measure. "Are you happy, Mrs. Jansen?" Levy asked softly, his arm tightening around her waist. Katherine tilted her face up to his, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "Completely, Mr. Jansen. I never imagined such happiness existed." Levy lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, passionate, tender, and utterly committed. As they had promised, Clara and Sullivan had prepared the east wing of the main house as a private apartment for the newlyweds. Though relatively simple by Eastern standards, to Katherine it was perfect, a spacious bedroom with large windows overlooking the valley, a comfortable sitting room with bookshelves Levy had built himself, and a small private dining area where they could take meals together when they wished for privacy. Their honeymoon in Denver, though brief, was a magical interlude of theaters, restaurants, and leisurely walks through a city that seemed impossibly grand and exciting after Platteville. Katherine delighted in showing Levy some of the refinements of urban life, while he approached everything with an open curiosity that endeared him even more to her. Upon their return to the Lazy S, they settled into a rhythm of life that suited them both. Levy's days were filled with the demanding work of the ranch, learning from Sullivan the finer points of cattle breeding, land management, and business negotiations. Katherine, meanwhile, found her own place at the Lazy S, helping Clara with household management, establishing a small library in one of the unused rooms, and even beginning informal lessons for the children of some of the ranch hands who had families. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. The cold months brought their own kind of intimacy as the household drew closer together. Evenings spent around the fireplace with books, conversation, and occasionally music when Katherine played the piano. Levy proved to have a pleasant baritone voice, and some of Katherine's fondest memories of that first winter were of singing together as snow fell softly outside. It was during one such cozy evening in January, as they sat in their private sitting room after dinner, that Katherine shared news she had been keeping to herself for several weeks. "Levy," she began, setting aside her book, "I have something to tell you." Levy looked up from the ranch ledgers he had been reviewing, immediately alert to the slight tremor in her voice. "What is it, love? Is something wrong?" Katherine shook her head, a smile blooming on her face. "Not wrong. Quite the opposite, in fact. I visited Dr. Marshall in town yesterday while you were checking the north pasture fences." Levy's brow furrowed in concern. "Are you ill?" "No," Katherine said, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "I'm going to have a baby. In July, the doctor thinks." For a moment, Levy seemed unable to process her words, his expression frozen in surprise. Then, as understanding dawned, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took Katherine's breath away. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." He pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain. "Are you feeling well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" Katherine laughed at his sudden flood of concerns. "I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know." "Not my wife," Levy pointed out seriously. "Not carrying my child. The The reverence in his voice as he spoke those words melted Catherine's heart. "I promise to take care of myself and our baby," she assured him. "But I don't intend to spend the next 6 months being treated like an invalid." True to her word, Catherine maintained her normal activities throughout the winter and into spring, though she did allow Levy and Clara to pamper her in small ways as her condition became more pronounced. Sullivan, upon learning of the impending addition to his household, was almost comically protective, insisting on the best of everything for the mother to be and commissioning a cradle to be built by the finest woodworker in Denver. "This will be the closest I ever get to a grandchild," the old rancher explained gruffly when Catherine tried to thank him. "Let an old man have his fussing." As Catherine's time grew nearer, her father came to stay at the Lazy S, not wanting to be far from his daughter during this important event. Henry and Sullivan, despite their different backgrounds and personalities, developed an unexpected friendship, spending long evenings discussing everything from politics to the price of beef. "Those two old men are like peas in a pod," Clara observed with amusement. "Who would have thought it?" July arrived with blazing heat that made Catherine's final weeks of pregnancy particularly uncomfortable. She found relief in the creek where Levy had proposed, sitting with her swollen feet in the cool water while Levy watched over her protectively. "Not much longer now, Doctor," Marshall had assured her during his last visit. "The baby has dropped and is in position. Any day, I would say." Those any days stretched into a week of increasing discomfort before Catherine finally felt the first contractions while helping Clara prepare preserves one hot afternoon. By evening, she was in the throes of active labor, with Clara, the doctor, and a midwife from a neighboring ranch in attendance. Levy, banished to the parlor with Sullivan and Henry, paced like a caged lion, flinching at every cry that echoed from the bedroom. "Sit down, boy," Sullivan ordered after nearly 2 hours of this. "You're wearing a trench in my floor." "How can I sit when she's suffering?" Levy demanded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "This is all my fault." Henry chuckled despite his own concern. "That's what every father thinks during his first child's birth. Trust me, Catherine is stronger than you know." As if to prove Henry's point, a different cry suddenly pierced the night, the unmistakable wail of a newborn. Levy froze mid-pace, his eyes flying to the bedroom door, which opened moments later to reveal a tired but beaming Clara. "Congratulations, Levy," she announced. "You have a son." Levy swayed slightly, steadied by Sullivan's hand on his shoulder. "A son, and Catherine is doing wonderfully," Clara assured him. "Come and see them both." The sight that greeted Levy as he entered the bedroom would remain etched in his memory forever. Catherine, pale but radiant, propped up against pillows with a small bundle cradled in her arms. Her hair was damp with perspiration, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes shone with a love and wonder that transcended physical discomfort. "Come meet your son," she invited softly. Levy approached the bed almost reverently, sinking down beside her to peer at the tiny, red-faced infant wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he blinked up at his father, eyes of the deepest blue. "He's perfect," Levy whispered, gently touching his son's cheek with one finger. "Just like his mother," Catherine smiled tiredly. "I was thinking we might name him Samuel after Mr. Sullivan, Samuel Henry Jansen." Levy nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. Finally, he managed, "It's a fine name. A name with history and honor behind it." He leaned forward to press a kiss to Catherine's forehead. "I love you so much. I never knew I could feel this way." "Nor I," Catherine admitted, adjusting the baby in her arms so Levy could see him better. "It's as if my heart has expanded to hold more love than I ever thought possible." Young Samuel thrived in the loving environment of the Lazy S, growing from a colicky newborn to a sturdy infant with remarkable speed. Katherine recovered quickly from the birth, and soon found a rhythm that allowed her to balance motherhood with her other responsibilities. Clara proved an invaluable help, often insisting on watching the baby so Katherine could have time to herself, while Sullivan doted on his namesake with undisguised adoration. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, Levy had begun construction on their own home, a comfortable house situated on a rise overlooking the creek where he had proposed. Sullivan had deeded them the land as a belated wedding present, insisting they should have a place that was truly their own while remaining part of the ranch. "Not that we're in any hurry to be rid of you," the old rancher had clarified. "But a man should build something with his own hands for his family." Levy threw himself into the project with characteristic determination, working on the house whenever he could spare time from his ranch duties. Katherine visited the site often, offering suggestions and encouragement, sometimes bringing baby Samuel to watch his father work. "He'll grow up knowing the value of hard work," Levy remarked one evening as they stood together watching the sunset from the partially framed structure. "And the importance of building something that lasts." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, their son sleeping peacefully in her arms. "We're building something that will last far beyond these walls, Levy. A family. A legacy." Levy wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close as he gazed out over the land that had become their home. "All because a horse got spooked by a snake," he mused. "Funny how life works, isn't it?" Katherine smiled, thinking of that terrifying day that had led to so much joy. "I wouldn't change a moment of it," she said softly. "Not even the fear, because it led me to you." As they stood together, the first stars appearing in the deepening twilight, Katherine felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected turns her life had taken. From a frightened young woman on a runaway horse to a wife, mother, and partner, in building a future on this beautiful land, it was more than she had ever dared to dream. And it had all begun with a chase across the Colorado prairie, and the steady hands of a cowboy who had pulled her to safety, and, in doing so, into a life of love and adventure beyond anything either of them could have imagined. The years passed with the rhythm of seasons on the Lazy S, each bringing its own joys and challenges to the growing Jansen family. Samuel was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Clara, when he was 3, and 2 years later by another brother, James Henry. The house by the creek expanded along with their family, additional rooms added as needed, always with Levy's careful craftsmanship and Katherine's thoughtful touches. Through it all, their love deepened, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. Katherine never forgot the wild terror of that runaway ride, nor the security she had felt when Levy pulled her to safety. In many ways, it had set the pattern for their life together, facing dangers and uncertainties, with the knowledge that they would always reach for each other when it mattered most. By the time their oldest son turned 18, ready to attend college back east with dreams of becoming a veterinarian, the Lazy S had grown into one of the most prosperous ranches in Colorado. Sullivan, now in his 80s but still sharp-minded, had gradually transferred more responsibility to Levy until the partnership was in name only, the day-to-day decisions firmly in the younger man's capable hands. "You've done well, son," Sullivan told Levy one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset. "Better than I could have hoped when I offered you that partnership all those years ago." Levy nodded, accepting the rare compliment from his mentor with quiet pride. "I had good teaching, and a reason to build something lasting." Sullivan's gaze drifted to where Katherine was walking toward them, their youngest child skipping alongside her. Even after nearly 2 decades of marriage, Levy's face still softened with love at the sight of his wife. "You know," Sullivan mused, "I remember telling you once that a man needs to find something worth putting down roots for. Seems to me you found the very best reason of all." Levy couldn't disagree. From the moment he had spotted Katherine on that runaway horse, something inside him had recognized her as his future, though he couldn't have articulated it then. Every instinct had driven him to chase her down, to pull her to safety not just from the immediate danger, but into the circle of his protection forever. "I did indeed," Levy agreed, rising as Katherine reached the porch. "The very best reason of all.